The Jets bench Justin Fields for Tyrod Taylor. It's the right move. Just don't expect it to fix anything. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, November 18th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. On today's show, we are going to look forward to the final 7 games of the 2025 season. We'll talk about how we define success over these final 7 games. We'll talk about why this season, the debate on whether the Jets should tank or not is pretty clear. There's a pretty definitive answer. In a way, there's usually not. But we're going to begin by talking about the quarterback position because the Jets have made a change. It is a significant one. Tyrod Taylor will start week 12 against the Baltimore Ravens. Justin Fields heads to the bench. We talked about this quite a bit on yesterday's show. And needless to say, if you listen to that show, I think that this is absolutely the correct decision. In fact, I think it's the only decision that could have been made for the New York Jets heading into this game against the Baltimore Ravens. Now, I want to throw a few caveats out there. Number one, it's not all Justin Fields' fault. If you look up and down this roster, this is a team with a real lack of talent. That's true on the offensive side of the ball. It's true on the defensive side of the ball. You can't say that the Jets' struggles are only based on the offense. The defense has been terrible this year. You can't say that the Jets' struggles on offense are only about Justin Fields. I think that there have been a lot of issues with the coaching. I think that the talent level, particularly at the skill positions, once you get past Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, is extremely weak. You can't just sit here and say that the Jets would be a good team without Justin Fields if somebody else was at quarterback. Putting Tyrod Taylor in there is not going to suddenly make the Jets a good team. It's not going to suddenly fix all the problems with the team. Another thing I would say is that the Jets simply had no good options at quarterback this offseason. I think a lot of people don't fully appreciate the magnitude of how damaging the last 2 years have been. In fact, I'm not sure I really appreciated the magnitude of how damaging the last 2 years have been up until the point where I realized that it forced the Jets to trade away Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams. I was against a lot of what the Jets did in the Aaron Rodgers era. I thought a lot of what they did was short-sighted, and I was very skeptical it would work out. And this has led to all sorts of implications for the franchise. It's created all sorts of negative effects for the franchise. One of them is that heading into 2025, there were no good options for this team at the quarterback position. You can say they shouldn't have signed Fields, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it clearly hasn't worked out. The thing is, I don't think there was anybody the Jets could have brought in who would have been able to fix this team in 2025. There were lots of bad options. Fields was the one the Jets chose. They thought that he was a worthy reclamation project. I think on paper, the move made sense, but it clearly has not panned out. The signing has clearly been just a colossal failure. I'll also say this. I think that Fields is a guy who's shown accountability, unlike a lot of people in this franchise, namely the owner. Fields is not a bad guy. He's just failed. But make no mistake about it. This was a move the New York Jets had to make. I don't think Tyrod Taylor is going to go in there and play at a high level. I don't think Tyrod Taylor is going to go in and suddenly fix this offense. It's just not realistic to think that. Tyrod's not good enough. And the pieces around Tyrod are not good enough. You look at what the Jets have at the receiver position right now. You're essentially going with a bunch of reclamation projects. Adonai Mitchell, an early round disappointment with the Indianapolis Colts. John Metchie, an early round pick who's faced an enormous amount of adversity in his career. These are guys who are just looking to show that they belong in the NFL. These are guys who, if we're going to be honest, face pretty long odds to be contributors for the Jets going forward. And even if they stick, they're much more likely to be role players than legitimate starters. Tyrod's got his own issues. In fact, a lot of Tyrod's weaknesses overlap what we've seen with Justin Fields this year. Tyrod is not a guy who gets the ball out on time. He's a guy who struggles with that in his career. If you look at Tyrod's stats, there's a very low interception rate historically. He's not a guy who throws a ton of interceptions, but part of that is that he sometimes doesn't fire the ball when there's an open receiver. Sometimes he's a little hesitant, maybe not to the degree Fields is, but I think you're going to see a lot of the same issues you saw with Justin Fields out there. And Tyrod, like Fields, maybe not in the same way, maybe not to the same degree, does not always pick his spots best when he chooses to scramble. And that leads to other issues along the line. In fact, if you watch Tyrod Taylor this year, you've seen a quarterback who struggled. He struggled in the game against Carolina when the Jets benched Fields at halftime and put Tyrod in. He did not play well in that game. In the game he started against Tampa Bay, the statistics look good, but that most of that was stat padding and what should have been garbage time. I know the Jets ended up losing that game on a last-second field goal, but what Tyrod did in that game productively was generally garbage time. It turned into something other than garbage time because Will McDonald made an acrobatic play to block a field goal and run it back for a touchdown. So I don't think you can expect that this to really change anything. The Jets are still going to have issues. This is a team that's just not there right now in terms of having the talent to compete. And Tyrod is a deeply flawed quarterback. But the big thing is that when you make a change like this, you reach a point where your quarterback play is just at such a low level that you have to switch something up. You have to make a change, even if it's just for the sake of making a change. And if you look at Fields this season, he started 9 games, and 6 of them have been horrendous. There's the one game against Dallas where he did a lot of stat padding and garbage time that makes his numbers look much more presentable than they really were. You look at the stat lines, he was 32 for 46 in that game. He had a 100 passer rating. It actually doesn't look bad. He had 2 touchdowns, but almost all of that production came when the game was out of hand and the Cowboys were playing really soft zones in the second half. But if you take that game out, there are 8 other games, and really only 3 where he put together a decent performance. They were the first game against Pittsburgh where, he lit up the Steelers and raised a lot of optimism for the season. There was a Monday night game, week 4 against the Miami Dolphins where he was okay. He wasn't great, but he was okay. And then the game against Cincinnati where the Jets won. I think other than those 3 games, the other starts have been awful. And it's one thing to be bad. Fields has struggled to the point where the offense simply could not move the ball. And that gives you a very little chance to win the game. I know the Jets did win one of those games against the Cleveland Browns, but it wasn't because of Fields. It was because Breece Hall took the game over in the second half, and frankly, because Dylan Gabriel missed some very makeable throws, and Will McDonald's had 4 sacks. Those are the reasons the Jets beat the Cleveland Browns. It really was not because of Justin Fields. Justin Fields played a really lousy game against Cleveland, and you reach a point where, even if Fields in theory is better than Tyrod, and I still think, like, if we were starting from scratch, I'd go with Fields over Tyrod. You just have to wonder where his confidence level is right now, because when a quarterback starts playing poorly and he becomes a lightning rod for criticism, particularly in a city like New York, sometimes you get a lower level performance than you would expect. And look, I wasn't expecting big things from Fields this season. I was hoping he'd be able to turn his career around. We've seen in the NFL, there have been reclamation projects in recent years where the quarterback has changed the trajectory of his career. I was hoping for something like that. I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting an inconsistent quarterback. We've gotten worse than I was expecting. I think we've gotten worse than anybody was expecting. The Jets were hoping that Fields would improve. If anything, Fields has regressed. This is his worst season since his rookie year. This is worse than his last couple of years in Chicago. It's worse than his year in Pittsburgh. He's reached the point where you just can't put him on the playing field right now. So the Jets turn to Tyrod Taylor. They're hoping, to get better quarterback play. Again, I don't think it's going to make a dramatic difference, but you reach a point where you just don't have a choice but to make this decision. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, the decision to move to Tyrod Taylor shows that the Jets have taken a definitive stance in the age-old question to tank or not to tank. I think usually there's a debate whether it's better off for a team to lose games and gain draft status or to win games and try and build a culture going forward. For this Jets team, the answer is pretty obvious. We'll take on the great tanking debate as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And looking ahead to Week 12 action, the Jets are heading to Baltimore. They are 14.5-point underdogs. That is an enormous line, and I can't say it's unfair. I think it's very difficult to expect the Jets to win this game. Well, if you want to get in on the action, FanDuel is the place to do it, because right now FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. A big shout out to everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. The New York Jets have made a quarterback change. It will be Tyrod Taylor starting this coming Sunday against the Baltimore Ravens. Tyrod taking on his original team. Tyrod spent the first 4 seasons of his career with the Baltimore Ravens before moving on to Buffalo, who's initially Joe Flacco's backup quarterback, then moved on to the Buffalo Bills, started there for 3 years, and then has bounced around the league since then. So a bit of a homecoming for Tyrod Taylor this coming Sunday. I think that this move signals that the Jets have taken a pretty definitive position in the debate of whether or not it's better to tank or win games. And it's kind of a Locked On Jets tradition this time of year that, unfortunately, that we discuss this debate. Whenever your team's out of the race, there's a segment of the fan base that wants the team to lose to gain draft position. And there's a segment that wants to win games because, you only get 17 games a year. You hope that you go out, you hope that you can get some wins, particularly with a first-year coaching staff or the first-year GM. You're trying to build a culture. I know it's a cliche, but they are. Aaron Glenn and Darren Mucci are trying to build for the future. Sometimes, not always, a good finish to the season can lead to momentum. Now, sometimes it doesn't mean anything. We've seen a lot of late season winning streaks that really did not translate to anything with the New York Jets. But I think that this year, the circumstances suggest that the Jets are better off trying to win games. This is not a team that's better off losing for draft position. A year ago, 2 years ago, I would have said something different. In 2023, the season was a colossal failure, and winning a couple late season games was not going to do anything. In 2024, the season was maybe even more of a colossal failure. And you knew that there were going to be massive changes. In fact, there were massive changes during the season. The Jets fired their head coach and general manager in season. Not only that, the roster was very old. You knew that there were a lot of guys who were not coming back. I mean, I think that we knew at this time last year that it was unlikely Aaron Rodgers would return. It was not a 100% guarantee, but it really would have made no sense to bring Rodgers back into this team. We knew Devontae Adams was going to be gone. We knew that Hassan Reddick was going to be gone. We knew that there was a good chance, C.J. Mosley, because of how banged up he was, because of all the injuries he had, and because he was playing at a pretty advanced age, would not return. There was really nothing to build on. I think things are very different this year. The Jets are in the complete opposite situation that they were a year ago. They entered the season with very few expectations, and they entered with a young team. If anything, this team has gotten younger. If anything, this is a team that through the course of the season has gone from young to super young. They've traded away 2 of their star players who were in their prime. This season's all about player development. And even if you go back to the start of the season, if you go back to the training camp, if you go back to the summer, one of the things we said over and over on this podcast is that the way the Jets finished the season was going to be a lot more important than the way they started. I think one of the interesting things when you get to the tanking debate is people say who are in favor of tanking, I want the Jets to lose games, but I want the young players to look good. And of course that can happen. But if your young players are looking good, if your young players are showing genuine growth, if your young players are showing progress, it's a sign that you're probably going to win games. Players playing well results in you winning more games. And I think for the New York Jets, you're looking at with a super young roster with, we talk about this every week, that there are like around 10 guys on each week, depending on injuries, depending on, which backups have to step up and take on a bigger snap role. But the Jets have an exceptionally young roster taking the field. And I think that maybe people are underselling that in the role that fact and the in the responsibility that fact's responsibility and how much the team is struggling this season. Uh, because we talk about undisciplined play. Well, young players tend to be undisciplined. I hear a lot when a team is struggling that, well, just play the young guys, get them some reps, see if you can develop them. I don't care if things look bad. Well, the Jets have kind of done that this year, and people do care. People are frustrated when there's undisciplined play, and you can't put it all on the young guys. I mean, there are undisciplined veterans on this team. Michael Clemens comes to mind. There are veterans who are making bad plays. There are veterans who are making dumb plays, but it's probably a lot more about these young guys being on the field than people want to admit. You want to see growth from these guys going forward. You want to see these guys start to develop. And if you do, they're going to begin winning games. Dan Campbell, it wasn't his first year. And, I hesitate to use this example because I think it's been overused. I think there are two comparisons with Aaron Glenn that I have almost been beaten into the ground. One is the comparison with Bill Parcells, because he played with Bill Parcells as a player. And look, Bill Parcells is a top 10 all-time coach. I think Aaron Glenn, sitting here at 2-8 in his first year, has not done a lot to merit those Bill Parcells comparisons. The second comparison is Dan Campbell, which on the surface is probably a better comparison because they inherited very similar situations. Teams with big histories of losing. It's not just a bad team that Aaron Glenn inherited. It's not just a bad team that Dan Campbell inherited. They inherited teams that have been bad for a really long time. Teams that almost have losing embedded into their DNAs. And the first year with Campbell was rough. Year two, the first half was rough. The Lions went on a big winning streak at the end of the season and got to 9-7. Now, I don't think that at the end of year one, Aaron Glenn's going to have the Jets a full year ahead of schedule and the season with, a 7-game winning streak to get to 9-8. This Jets team's not going to have a winning record. The talent's just not there yet. So, the best days for the Jets under Aaron Glenn are hopefully ahead. They're almost certainly ahead. If Aaron Glenn's successful, the best days are almost certainly ahead. And the reason I say that is because you have 8 picks in the first 2 rounds over the next 2 drafts. The current team, we've seen it all year long, is simply not good enough. But I do believe you can start to build some momentum going forward by getting wins. Again, sometimes these late season winning streaks are a mirage. I remember when Adam Gase was in his first season, the Jets started 1-7. Then they finished the last half of the season 6-2. They got to 7-9. That was not a sign of genuine improvement. You can go back to any podcast I did in between 2019 and 2020, and I said that that was a mirage. That was not something that should lead anybody to believe that the Jets were improving, that Adam Gase was a good coach. And part of that was that in 2019, the Jets were a pretty veteran-oriented team. And even going beyond that, the Jets' schedule got really, really soft near the end of that season. The Jets were kind of squeaking out narrow wins over some of the worst teams in the NFL. And in the last game of that season, they beat Buffalo's backups. It was not an impressive showing to win 6 of their last 8. It was more noise. It was more luck than anything. This year's Jets team, if they start running off some wins at the end of the season, I think it's likely to be a sign of genuine growth from young players. And I think that's something to be celebrated. I think one thing you should realize by now in the NFL, if you're a Jets fan, because we're now heading to year 15 where this team has missed the playoffs, a high draft pick guarantees nothing. There are great players available late in the first round. It's who's making the pick that matters much more than where you're picking. A good GM and the good teams, they find players who are quality players, even though they're picking later in the first round. Bad teams like the Jets, and we're hoping to get the Jets out of this cycle, they pick high every single year. And the reason they pick high every single year is that a high pick's no guarantee of success. So I think that it's clear right now, there are some years where the team's probably better off losing games at the end of the season. The Jets this year are better off winning games. And I think the fact the Jets are making a quarterback change right now shows you they're not tanking. They believe that there are games to be won. I don't know if Tyrod Taylor is going to be able to deliver, but they know that they can't win games with Justin Fields, so they're making this switch. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll dive a little bit deeper. What does success really mean over the final 7 games of the season? It's a lot about player development. There are some young guys we're hoping to see progress from. We'll talk about who they are as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets.
Today's show is brought to you by our friends over there at Peloton. Look, folks, it's time to break through the busiest time of the year with a brand new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus that's powered by Peloton IQ. It's Peloton's most elevated technology and equipment yet that gives you real-time guidance, and it gives you endless ways to move, whether you want to work out by yourself or if you want to work out with your favorite instructor, like my personal favorite, Alex Toussaint. He always gets me fired up to tackle the day. And the thing I like about Peloton, it helps me achieve more in less times. They have features that help you plan, stay motivated, track your progress, and Peloton IQ also provides personalized workout plans and recommendations. That's something that I use right now during the busiest time of the year covering the NFL. They plan my workouts for me based on my mood, my vibe, and also my favorite instructors. So make sure you check it out and use it, because it also helps you correct your form in real time, and it maximizes your reps. It counts your reps so that you can do it smarter, safer, and more efficient. Let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We are looking forward to the final 7 games of the 2025 season today. The New York Jets have made a change at quarterback. Tyrod Taylor is starting this Sunday against the Baltimore Ravens. We talked about that in our first segment. In our second segment, we talked about why this year is not a year to root for the Jets to tank. And I know that that will be a controversial statement. It probably will not be well received in some quarters of the fan base, but I think it's true. I think that this is a team that's better served by going out there and trying to compete and trying to win games. And a big part of that is the youth movement the New York Jets have made. I think whenever there's a new head coach and a new GM, there's a lot of talk about we're going to build through the draft. We're going to try and build a young core here. But this regime, Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji, they have really committed to it. I mean, if you look at the game against the New England Patriots, I mean, who's getting big snaps for this team on the offensive side of the ball? Obviously the 2 tackles, Fashanu and Armand Membou, they're playing the full game. John Metchie got 47 snaps in that game. Metchie's a fairly young guy. Adonai Mitchell got a look, his first action as a Jet. He got half the snaps in that game, and he's still kind of learning the playbook. So him getting half the snaps is a big deal. And I'm sure his snap total will go up going forward, despite a pretty rough game. Isaiah Davis has kind of carved out a role on this offense as the number 2 back. You look at defense, Malachi Moore's now a starter. Jarvis Brownlee has a full-time role. There are guys, Juwan Briggs is one of the big beneficiaries of the Quinnen Williams trade. He's seen his snap total go up in recent weeks. The Jets are playing a lot of young guys. A.Z. Thomas is going to return at some point. He'll be right back in the starting lineup. Jets are really trying to develop young guys on this football team. And if we talk about what success means the rest of the season, I do think winning games matters. I think that you want to win games. And you can scoff at the idea that wins at this point of the season are important. I think they are important to the coaching staff. I think they're important to the players. If you compare what's being said about the New York Jets right now with what was said when they started 0-7, it just feels like there's less criticism. Look, this team is still taking a lot of heat. And I think whenever you are in this situation, whenever you're 2-8, you're going to be a lightning rod for criticism. But it's not as intense as it was. I mean, when the Jets started 0-7, we were talking about whether or not it was possible that this coaching staff and this front office could be one and done. Things are completely different now. Now, part of that is the Jets made some moves at the deadline that were very forward thinking, that essentially require us to see what this front office and what this coaching staff can do with the resources that the team just acquired. But sometimes wins just take the pressure off you. And I think that as much as the fan base is frustrated right now, it's a lower level of frustration than what we had at the start of the season. There are less calls for Aaron Glenn to be fired right now than there were at the start of the season. There still might be criticism, but there's nowhere near the amount of grief that this coaching staff and front office were getting before the Jets had won a game. So what do the Jets need to do going forward? Well, you want to see progress from these young guys. It's one thing to play young guys. That doesn't mean that they're going to be able to develop. And to be clear, not every young player the Jets are putting on the field is going to develop into a good player. When you have these youth movements, that's not how it works. I remember back in 2021, the Jets went super young at corner. They started Bryce Hall, they started Brandon Eccles, and they started Michael Carter II. And when you start 3 guys like that, really, I think what you're looking for, I think the measure of success is if one of those guys turns into a good player. And that's exactly what happened for the New York Jets, is Michael Carter II turned into a good player. I mean, there are guys from the 2025 draft class who are not going to pan out as players. I don't think it's overly negative to say that. The Jets just probably have not made the greatest draft. Jets have probably not selected the greatest draft class in the history of the NFL, because even the greatest GMs, even the greatest draft classes have misses. You go back to 2022, the Jets had a great draft class. They picked Sauce Gardner, they picked Garrett Wilson, they picked Breece Hall, they picked Jermaine Johnson. There were still some misses in that draft class. Max Mitchell in the 4th round, I don't think you could say that's a success. Michael Clemens in the 4th round, I don't think you could say that's a success. Jeremy Ruckert late in the 3rd round, not a success. Even in one of the great draft classes in franchise history, the Jets had some misses. The hope, though, is that you develop some of these guys. And even if they're not stars, even if they're not impact players, you hope that they can be part of the solution going forward. So, obviously the 2 tackles are critical for the Jets. Armand Membou looks like a plug-and-play guy. I mean, he looks like a guy who's going to be a right tackle for the Jets for the next 8 to 10 years if all goes well. He stepped on the field and immediately looked like a player. You go back to week 1 where he had an excellent game against TJ Watt, a game that frankly I was not expecting. And I was a big Membou fan. I liked the pick when the Jets made it. I thought he would require more time to develop. He stepped right into the lineup and done a great job off the bat. Olu Fashanu, it's been a bit of a longer runway for him, but you're seeing real signs of progress. You're starting to see some positive signs for Olu. And you have to remember that the tackle position is one of the most difficult transition positions in the NFL. There's really not quality training at this point at the college level because of the way college systems run. In college football, the rules are different. You can go 3 yards down the field without being an ineligible receiver down the field, which means you can run a lot more screens in college than you can in the NFL, where you can only go 1 yard down the field before you're ineligible on a passing play. So you have far fewer natural pass sets in college, which means that players aren't getting the game reps they were 20, 30 years ago at the tackle position to prepare them for the NFL. And you see guys struggle year 1, year 2, sometimes even year 3. They develop into good players. I like where Olu Fashanu is right now. He's not great. He has his struggles at times, but I think that he's making real progress. And I think there are really promising signs. And when you can lock down both tackle positions, you've built something good. And we know that the Jets are very, very likely to draft a quarterback next spring. If they don't, they'll almost certainly do it the following spring in 2027. This team has a lot of work to do to build this offense, and the offensive line's not complete. Jets have 2 of their starters who are about to hit free agency this offseason. It's not clear what the Jets are going to do with those guys, but starting with 2 quality tackles, that's a big deal. And you want to see Fashanu and Membou continue to look good going forward. And across the rest of the team, you hope that of the guys who are getting reps, your AZ Thomases, your Mason Taylors, your Malachi Moores, Jarvis Brownlee, Juwan Briggs. You hope to see progress. Can Briggs develop more of a pass rushing game? We know he's big. We know he's strong. We know he can hold up against the run. Question is whether he can develop into more of a pass rusher. Can AZ Thomas develop into a quality starting corner? That's what the Jets want in him. Malachi Moore, it hasn't been perfect for him, but for a rookie, I like where he's at. I think that, he's shown real signs of promise for a guy who's just been thrown into the lineup. Jarvis Brownlee Jr., it's been a rough last couple of weeks. We can't sugarcoat it. He looked really good the first couple of games with the Jets. He's looked really bad the last 2 games. Can he be a solution for the Jets as a slot corner? Can he be kind of a versatile guy who can slide inside and outside? I think that's the hope. And we can go down the roster. We can talk about the receivers, Metchie and AD Mitchell. Can one of these guys develop into maybe a number 3 receiver? Look, I don't think you can expect both of these guys to develop into quality starters. If either of these guys develops into a number 3 receiver, that's at least something for the Jets going forward. They're still going to need to upgrade the receiver room this offseason, but you want to see progress. And look, progress does not mean that all these guys are going to pan out. It does not mean all these guys are going to turn out to be good. You just want to see these guys develop. You want to see a handful of these guys. You want to see a base of talent begin to take shape and perhaps provide a foundation for the future of the New York Jets. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is Armand. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we will do our weekly mailbag. Talk to you then.